But our next speaker before Stan and the break is Ms. Keyia Yalcin. Keyia is one of the PRT members. She may be the youngest. I'm not sure about that, but she's certainly in I think the millennial class. But we in the PRT try to continue the pipeline of successful business people in our community. Keyia Yalcin is probably one of the few African-American women who are in real estate development. She's launched a number of projects, both in the business and residential area in the Baltimore, Washington, and Virginia markets. She's also, what's the word, restaurateur. She has a number of restaurants that she started. And if you ever want to try some great seafood, she has one of them in College Park, Maryland. Excellent restaurant and seafood cuisine. Keyia Yalcin is the founder and owner of the Yalcin Group. Keyia received her master's degree in real estate development from Georgetown University and her BBA degree in business hospitality management from Howard University. Keyia has worked vigorously towards crafting a unique set of skills to manage properties and to consult on development activities, as well as working towards small business designations to expand her business in the Mid-Atlantic area. I had the other blessing, along with many of us in PRT, I hope she doesn't mind me saying this, of knowing Keyya's mother, who was a stellar, successful entrepreneur in technology before she sold her company and did very well. So Keyia comes from great stock and great business DNA. So I present to you Ms. Keyia Yalcin, who will talk to you about the creative class and particularly from a young person's perspective. Keyia. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, hello everyone. My name is Keyia Yalcin. I'm going to put a timer on myself because one of the things that I do as a hobby is I'm in academia. So I teach economic and community development at the University of Baltimore, so I'm used to looking out at students and their eyes glazing over because I've lectured too long. So I'll definitely try to keep this short and sweet and to the point for you. So my name is Keyia Yalcin. I run a company called the Yalcin Group, and we do a few different things. We have a development arm, we have a property management arm, and we also have a hospitality arm. Now, the Yalcin Group is 10 years old, and when it started, it didn't look like this. It looked like one house that I was interested in flipping because everyone was flipping houses. If you remember the go-go days of real estate where the mailman was a mortgage broker, right? And everyone was flipping houses and waiving home inspections, and it was just happening. So I got involved in real estate during that time, and I bought my first house in 2007. And then I think 2 or 3 months later, Bear Stearns crashed. So that was the beginning of my understanding as an entrepreneur. I realized, hey, this real estate thing is actually an industry that I should probably learn about and get serious about like anything else. So as the market was crashing, I was going to grad school at Georgetown University, and then we were also, my husband and I got into the restaurant business because my first degree from Howard is in hospitality management. So we decided to get into seafood. And we were both waiters, very excited. We're like, yeah, we're gonna do this. We're gonna open a restaurant. And I found out that liking food is very different from opening a restaurant, right? Just because you can make a good dish in your kitchen doesn't mean you need to run out and open a restaurant. But we did. And so 6 years later, we have Fishnet in College Park and Drift on 7th, which is right near the Howard University corridor, right off of 7th Street. So very, very tough business. But if you get it right, it's very enjoyable. So the real estate side, I also focus on multifamily, 100 units and less. So this is our project on Charles Street. This is a project we did in DC. This is one of my early projects, and a low-income housing tax credit deal that I'm doing in West Baltimore, 66 units. Of affordable housing. So lots of diversity in the things that I do. My days are never the same. but it keeps it interesting and keeps it exciting. So one of the things that I'm up here to talk to you about is the creative class. So the creative class is a phrase coined by economist Richard Florida. How many have heard of Richard Florida? Okay, I'll tell you all about him, one of my favorites. So it's a new word for a very common concept. Once I explain to you what the creative class is, you'll probably say, oh, that's me. And it includes a lot of people. It's a very diverse spectrum of people in the creative class. My goal today is to do 3 things. So I want to encourage and inspire you. One of my favorite entrepreneurs is T.D. Jakes. And a lot of people know him as a bishop. A lot of people know him as a media person. But I like him best as an entrepreneur. And one of the things that he says is that people don't need more information. They need revelation, right? So you have access to more information than you've probably ever had in your entire life, okay? The question is, what do you do? How do you act on that information, right? So you know what to do. It's just, you need to be encouraged and inspired to take it to the next level. The second thing I want to do is create a sense of urgency. So one of the things, as a millennial, it's easy to think that we have all this time, right? And I encourage millennials and anybody to look at life in a finite period of time, okay? You don't have as much time as you think. So doing something tomorrow or the next day, or I'll get to it next year, it's just not something realistic, right? If you look at your working career, you may have 40 or 50 years to kind of really get a career done if you hit the ground running in your 20s. If you spend a decade partying, then maybe you have 30, 40 years, right? You want to retire early, maybe you have 20, 30 years. So you really have to look at time as a finite period and understand that you need to create a sense of urgency with your entrepreneurial goals. The third thing that I want to do is share some information with you. So one of the things, I did say that you don't need a lot of information, you need revelation. But there are some key things that I do want to share with you because we are now in a sharing economy. So when I talk about sharing economy, I'm talking about the economy that shares, the Airbnb, we're sharing space, Uber, we're sharing cars, rent the runway, we're sharing clothes. Okay, so we're in a sharing economy. It's a new age. And that's something that I think we all have to be very cognizant of as we move forward. So one of my favorite quotes by Tony Robbins is that people overestimate what they can do in a year or two, but they underestimate what they can do in 20 or 30 years. So everything that I'm going to tell you about entrepreneurship, it's not easy. It's very hard, but it's very much so worth it if you're able to succeed. And I think the chance that you're able to succeed is worth all the pain and the hardship, because if you succeed, you change your family, you change your community, and you inspire hope in the people who are looking at you. There are people looking at you who you don't even know are looking at you, waiting for you to succeed so that you can understand, so that they can understand that they too can succeed. Okay, so one of the things, because entrepreneurship is so big, I think of it in the terms of the quintessential question, how do you eat an elephant? Has anyone ever heard this before? Okay, so how do you eat an elephant? Yes, one bite at a time, right? So I can tell you that about 8 years ago, I was working in retail at Macy's in the jewelry counter, right? And I was thinking about this the other day. I couldn't tell myself, the person that was working at Macy's at the jewelry counter, how to get here. I couldn't tell you that. I just had to do it one step at a time. And even though I was working at Macy's at the jewelry counter, I think my company was maybe like 2 years old. The economy had just crashed, and I had no idea what to do, right? So you just have to take it one step at a time. And just because you're not Mark Zuckerberg, in 26 and Facebook and you're a multimillionaire, doesn't mean that you're not successful in your own right, right? It doesn't mean that every little bit is not a win. And so you definitely have to think about entrepreneurship in big picture terms. So one of the articles that I was reading the other day, which was really, really interesting, said that entrepreneurship is actually on the decline. And this article and others like it, they look at traditional sources. So the number of business filings, people forming corporations and LLCs, goes down every year, right? So that traditionally makes people think that entrepreneurship is down. But I would encourage you to think a little bit differently about that. So when folks look at entrepreneurship and they say that these numbers are down, they blame it on three things. So first is the generation, that this new generation is not as interested in becoming entrepreneurial. They don't have as much as endurance as, say, the boomers or other generations. So that's one reason. The other reason is that large companies dominate the market. So your companies like Amazon, Apple, you have huge conglomerates who are just dominating the market, and they just don't leave any room for a little guy to get scale. So that's another reason. And then access to capital. Access to capital has long been an issue for small business. I would argue that access to capital makes small businesses more creative, and it makes them a little more aggressive because the odds are stacked against you. So you have to overcome these hurdles in order to be successful. However, with all of that information, I, as a millennial, still see people starting businesses all around me, right? And so I kind of couldn't quite jive with the information that was in front of me. And that's because entrepreneurship doesn't look like it has looked traditionally, right? So you see in a lot of things like WeWork, the shared work space, where people, they have a day job and maybe they have a side hustle that they run out of WeWork or some other sort of shared workspace. You see people setting up stands at farmers markets and they're selling, handmade goods and services. You also see people just starting online businesses. Maybe they don't have a storefront, but they set up a website and they figure out a way to sell goods. Or you see them selling stuff on like Etsy. So entrepreneurship looks different in a lot of ways because you have sole proprietorships, you have incubators, online shops, shared workspace, pop-up shops, farmers markets, and you have your consultants, your freelancers, and one of my favorites are food trucks. If I could do it all over again, I'd get a food truck in a heartbeat and never open a restaurant. But entrepreneurship looks differently than it has traditionally looked. So just because it looks different, I would encourage you to look in these alternative spaces, and even you as entrepreneurs, look at these alternative ways of being an entrepreneur, and make sure that you're out there and that you're putting your best foot forward. So the creative class, back to something I alluded to a little bit earlier. The creative class is a phrase coined by economist Richard Florida. Now, I like Richard Florida because I'm interested in space and place as a developer. Real estate, urban environments, that's right up my alley. So Richard Florida, his thesis is basically this, that if you have a city that can attract people who are creative, then you can revitalize cities and create economic development. How so? So the creative class are people that use their brain power in order to create money, right? So entrepreneurs, neurosurgeon, singer, restaurateur, anybody who's using their thoughts or creatively thinking in order to make money for themselves. These folks are interested in the acquisition of experience, right? So maybe they will live tiny so that they can go backpacking through India. Or you'll hear about folks who are doing a Fulbright in the middle of their career, or maybe they're a Vista. These different things that you hear where professionals who are smart, who are creative, are looking for experience, and so that they can take this experience and apply it to solving problems, right? So the diversity in experience means that they can solve more problems. And the more problems they solve, the more money they make, okay? So Florida says that these folks who are creative, if they're drawn to cities because they don't have to work in any one place in particular. They can work online, they can work from wherever. If they're drawn to cities, then cities kind of have this creative capital that they can use to economically revitalize themselves and do better. So why I like Florida and this creative class, because it gives us hope, right? It says that maybe we as entrepreneurs, access to capital is an issue of ours. Okay, well, maybe let's try moving to an urban environment like Baltimore, right? It has all the bones to suit the creative class. We can go to restaurants, we can walk to places, we can lower our bases of living so that we have more money to invest in our business. So, things like this really give me hope for a new class of entrepreneur, because it teaches us ways that we can, lower our costs, put more money into our businesses, and surround ourselves with people who are like-minded in order to continue to build our businesses in non-traditional ways. So one of the things that I find at this stage of my business is that I have to constantly surround myself with encouraging and positive messages. One of the things about entrepreneurship is that sometimes it's an internal fight. Can you or can you not do this, right? You are the person that you're fighting the most. Can you take it to the next level? Can you not? Yes, there are external forces, but sometimes it's you and your own confidence. One of the first books that I read very early on to kind of help me think about entrepreneurship was Rich Dad, Poor Dad. How many people read this old book? So I grew up where I thought that, my home was my biggest asset. I really thought that. And I remember being 20-something, owning my first home, and then after I put the numbers together after I sold it, I said, wait a minute, I lost money on this thing. Fixing the AC, fixing the roof, the mortgage, all of it. I lost money on it, right? So it was interesting because this was the first book that I had ever read that said something contrary to the messages that I was hearing around me. How to win friends and influence people. So this is another favorite of mine that has been so helpful. I've probably read this book 4 or 5 times over the years. It never gets old to me. Why? Because the whole thing is about relationships. You've heard it many times today, that it's about partnerships, it's about relationships, it's about strategy, it's about synergy. So you need to know how to build relationships, and if you're good at it, get better at it. You can never be too good at building relationships. And then Think and Grow Rich, that was another one that was interesting to me. There were things in that book that I read that shifted my paradigm, right? Just minor concepts. And this is a very old book that really made me think differently about entrepreneurship. And the messages that I'm getting from these books were very contrary to, what I may see on TV or what people around me might be saying. So it's important to surround yourself with some of the knowledge that is in these books, because the best secrets are still to this day kept in books. And then the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I remember at one point in my life, you couldn't wake me up before 11 o'clock. And I think that there were just some fundamental strategies of being an effective person that this book helped me learn, being a young entrepreneur. So those were the things that I started with, and my current reading list right now, so I told you that I really admire T.D. Jakes as an entrepreneur, and he just really gives some real-world tactics of how to be successful. So it's easy to look up here and say, okay, wow, I'm so inspired, but how? How do you go from, like I was telling you earlier, the Macy's jewelry counter to this. Like, it's hard to explain. You just kind of got to do it one day at a time. And that's what I like about this book. It kind of gives you step 1, step 2, step 3. Tools of the Titans. This was an interesting one because Tools of the Titans talks about things such as fasting and metabolic rates and exercise and just things that you don't think of that successful people do, right? It talks about sabbaticals and just the wildest stuff, hydro tanks, where you're in a pool of water and it's completely quiet and you're meditating. So, I mean, just very interesting out-of-the-box things that successful people do. And then the origins of the urban crisis. So at this stage in my career, I always read one industry-specific book, right? This one just happens to be about economic and community development and how urban environments have decayed. And I would encourage you that even in your industries, that you should always be on top of what you're doing, be cutting edge, be at the top of your game and learning. Okay, so anything that's out in your industry, at least be reading one book about that so that you can just stay abreast of everything that's happening. So in conclusion, I want to leave you with a quote by John C. Maxwell, who's another person that I like to read. So the longer you wait to do something you should do now, the greater the odds that you will never actually do it, right? And this is so important because you don't want to be knowledge on ice, right? You don't want to be the person who has all the information and you're like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. You just got to do it, right? You got to take that first step. And it doesn't matter if it's just, okay, I fill out my LLC paperwork, okay? That's great. That's a step in the right direction. Just take that first step. And I want to remind you that you have all the information. You can do this or you would not be sitting in this room. And just keep doing more of what it is that you are doing. You're creative, you're entrepreneurial, and you definitely can take it to the next level. So with that, thank you. I hope you were encouraged a little bit. And any questions? Great. Go get them.